Hello and welcome. Episode 32 of the Power Score LSAT podcast. This is Jon Denning, trying not to lose his voice in Los Angeles.
And this is Dave and Lauren in Napa Valley, feeling just fine.
Sounding buttery smooth compared to me.
Yeah, I've got the Jim Morrison voice going today. It's going to sound
You want to read some bad poetry for a minute?
I will, actually.
She dances in a ring of fire, shrugs off the challenge with the flame. Yeah.
Well, John, it's been actually, I think, 2 weeks since we recorded an episode. Is there a reason for that?
Well, there's lots of reasons. You were the first half of those reasons, and then I gleefully took on the second half. You finally have power again, which is a progress that we're all looking forward to, I think.
Yeah, let's go through the timeline of exactly what we've gone through in the last couple weeks.
It's probably good for me to remember.
Although gone through isn't exactly fully descriptive of it because I spent the first week in Paris.
Yeah, we haven't suffered, but yeah.
Yeah, there was no sufferation there. In fact, I love Paris. It's absolutely fantastic. I did walk by the Louvre and take a picture in front of that glass pyramid by I Am Pei.
Yeah.
I almost posted it on Twitter and been like, but I didn't want to trigger anybody from July.
Yeah, I saw a lot of those pyramid pictures going up.
A lot of people were flipping off the pyramid.
Angrily, yeah. You didn't go? Did you go in the Louvre?
Not this time.
Gotcha.
I had a 7-year-old with me, and the Louvre is just so big, and it was crowded. I don't think it would be good. But we did go in the d'Orsay. We went into the Orangerie.
That's good.
Went into a couple other museums, and she actually had a great time. So
I believe that she did. Yeah, she's a curious one, so I'm sure she explored plentifully.
She loved Paris. She wants to move there now.
Well,
I support that.
You know, before Notre Dame, I would have said there weren't so many fires to deal with, but too soon? Is that too soon?
No, they're still working on that one, unfortunately. But I did come back, and on a sad note, the Kincaid fire specifically, wasn't too far from me. And that not only caused a lot of damage up here, but it shut my power off for over 5 days.
Yeah.
Which normally I'd be like, okay, it happens. We have a generator. But then my generator broke.
Yeah, you were not glamping. No,
I wasn't. I was displeased with my decision to return from Europe. I was like, why didn't I just stay here?
Seriously.
So at that point, once I got power back, I believe you had already been to Vegas once and then were turning around and going again.
Yeah, all my internal organs just cringed. Yes, I did Vegas last weekend for my birthday. And a dear friend of ours who lives there more or less dared me to come back for Halloween. And look, don't threaten me with a good time. So I did. We saw Marilyn Manson for Halloween on Thursday. And on the way to Marilyn Manson, there was a billboard that said Guns N' Roses were playing the next night. So I stayed for another day. And then we saw Guns N' Roses, which is why I sound like this.
But, you know, we've talked about this, so I know the answer. How was Guns N' Roses?
God, how much time have you got for me to complain? Marilyn Manson's a band I really don't care about, and they were so good, dude. Their drummer is a beast. He sounded great. So much fun. I rekindled with an old flame. It was great, although she left me for Marilyn and Nicolas Cage backstage, so that could have gone better.
That sounds like an interesting threesome.
She made the right decision. Oh, boy. All right.
You're the one that said it, not me.
Conversationally. Yes. Conversationally. She said she couldn't get a word in edgewise.
It does strike me that at this juncture, you have now announced to the world that you and your girlfriend are no longer together.
Don't name drop her. Oh, yeah, that's right.
I won't name drop her.
Someone would look her up, and I'd like to think put in a good word for me.
I will put in a good word for her, who I liked quite a bit. I'm sad that you guys broke up.
She deserves it more than I do. Wait, are we talking about Las Vegas? Or are we talking about the ex?
No, we're talking about your ex right now.
They're both fantastic people.
The girl in Las Vegas, interestingly enough, years ago, I was there when John met her.
Should I tell a story?
You can. I was there, but I don't know her that well. That's the funny thing.
It's been a fairy tale adventure. So, Heritage Golf Tournament, Hilton Head, South Carolina, 2003, maybe?
No, it had to be later than that, man.
All right. Anyway, we're on a horse trolley, which takes you back from the golf tournament to the public parking, and I see a vision. Just the most beautiful girl I think I've ever seen in my life, 2 rows behind me, sitting with her father. And I was spellbound, David. You were there.
So many comments.
Oh, man. Yeah, I hope she listens to this.
She won't.
And then promptly unfriends me. Deletes my number. You creep. Speaking of creep, they got off the horse trolley, I don't know, a half a mile from where our car was.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help myself. I chased her. I left you. I left everyone that we were with. And I chased her across the horse pasture in front of her father and demanded that we hang out that night. Her dad looked at me with disgust. Bemusement. I apologized to him first. I was like, dude, I'm so sorry. And yeah, ever since.
Yeah, you guys have known each other for quite a while.
Yeah. But I hadn't seen her.
I will say this.
Before Vegas, I hadn't seen her in 13 years. And wouldn't you know, she's better looking than ever.
Well, I know that
this girl.
When you guys met, the magnetism was palpable. I was like, you could actually feel it. And this is the ridiculous part of the statement, on the trolley.
On the trolley.
We were on.
Yeah. Well, I know I could feel it.
Well, I'm glad you got to go see those shows.
Nothing has changed. Yeah, she left me for Nick Cage on Thursday.
Just to go hang out.
I saw Fat Axel being miserably bad on Friday. And then she and I went to dinner last night, and I left her for a table full of Australian dudes at some club. So I think we're even.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Musically, it's interesting. You saw GNR. I saw them 2 years ago, and the interesting thread here is when I saw them, it was in San Francisco at basically AT&T Park, the giant stadium.
Yeah.
And they had an opening band there who I'd never heard of. And maybe it was 3 years ago now. And so
I know this story.
Yeah, I looked them up and started listening to the music. And by the time the concert, which was a couple weeks later, by the time I got to that point, I was far more excited about the opener to that GNR show because the opener turned out to be the Struts.
A band that we have actually used in this podcast a couple of times. And to take us full circle, how many times did you see them in Paris?
I only saw them once in Paris.
Okay.
But I want everyone out there to realize what I just said. I just saw the Struts in Paris. That ranks really high on the cool factor.
That is an impressive bit of resume. Yeah, I did Marilyn Manson and Guns N' Roses back to back, and I want my money back.
Well, I can tell you that one of my friends here was like, wait a second, you saw the Struts there? Is that the reason you went? And I was like, don't tell anybody, but yeah. That's actually what made that whole trip happen.
Not culture for your child.
She didn't get to go.
Yeah, good.
Which was unfortunate, but she did ask me about it, and I showed her clips from the show, and she thought it was pretty cool.
That's cool. She's a cool kid.
Anyway, all that aside, because you just got back from Vegas, and then I assume you were out late last night. What are you drinking today?
I appreciate you giving me that much credit. I'm not drinking a thing, buddy. No.
You've been beaten down by the system.
I am defeated.
Yes.
Yeah, I am truly defeated. Maybe later, but right now, midday on a Sunday, I just want to sleep for a week. That's it.
I'll be drinking tonight. We've got friends coming over.
Look at you.
And I've heard that they have some, he's an attorney friend of mine, and he's got some kind of crazy story that I'm looking forward to hearing.
I love that. I just want to cuddle. That's all I want right now.
So since it is the afternoon, I will say that I am drinking because I'm going to be drinking later, so why not start now? I am having an old classic. I remember my parents ordering this drink years ago, and it is a Tom Collins, which is an interesting drink for me because I don't like gin that much. And this is a drink that's a lot of gin. It's got lemon juice. It has sugar, which is really the saving grace. And then you put like club soda in it. But I think I told you this before, that I found this gin. It's called the Botanist.
Yeah.
That is really very, I think, taste friendly, and it doesn't have a lot of that juniper heaviness to it.
Yeah, we've had some gin conversations. They usually revolve around Ryan Reynolds.
Yes.
There's a history to this, right? Either the drink or the gin or something. Like, doesn't this go back, like, eras, like 100+ years?
It's like 150 years old is when that drink first came up. Some famous bartender in America was the one who first recognized it. But it's kind of an interesting drink just because it's a little bit fizzy, but it has some sweetness to it. There's some tartness with the lemon. And then the gin kind of sits underneath it all, and it's not overpowering. It's easy to drink, and it's kind of nice for a Sunday afternoon.
I like a Tom Collins. If my liver didn't have its bags packed right now, I'd consider it. We are not on speaking terms.
Well, since you feel so good, I know that the song that we chose mirrors that, and it mirrors a couple other things. But the musical selection for today is from a band called The Pretty Reckless, which is fronted by Taylor Momsen, who used to be on Gossip Girl, and I think is actually a incredibly good singer.
She's got a great voice, man.
Yeah.
Little Cindy Lou Who grew right up.
It's weird, her history. But after she kind of semi-retired from acting and really got into modeling, she wanted to be in a rock band. And so they're actually pretty good. And the song is called Make Me Wanna Die, which is how I think you're feeling.
I feel better than I sound. I'll put it that way. Although I will say this song is not based off of me today. This is based around what we're going to talk about, which is the October LSAT.
Yes, but I had to tie it in there.
No, I get it. No, thank you very much for reminding me.
So, maybe because it is Sunday afternoon, and I don't think we've ever recorded on a Sunday afternoon before. Maybe that's just causing us to be expansive in our introduction, but that's the end of that. Let's move on to the LSAT world.
Let's do it. What's been going on in the LSAT world?
I'm going to do a really quick overview.
Good.
Because I don't think this is a whole lot of useful information for test takers, which is always our focus. So since we last recorded, they've done a couple different things. They put out one of their famous short podcasts. This one, in the keeping up to data vein, came in at 2 minutes and 38 seconds. So that was 2 seconds longer than the shortest ever. But you can see that after starting at 5 minutes, they're now down to around 2.5 minutes. So they're keeping it nice and tight.
Maybe probably we should take a cue.
So we don't make further comments on it.
Could be it.
The biggest thing out of there, forum attendance is flat. It's up, I think, just a shade, but it's about the same as it was last year. They always update the information that they have with their numbers, which I really appreciate, and I will give them a shout out here to say keep up the data, updating with the number of applicants and registrations. The November registration at this point for the November LSAT is over 30,000, which means the November test is going to be the biggest test of the year.
Yeah.
It's more than 6,000 test takers larger than July, which was 24,000 or so, and is the second largest test of the year.
Yeah, July being kind of historical. Yeah. November has eclipsed it, which is amazing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say historical because back when there were just 4 LSATs, you had tests that were bigger, but in the current era that we're dealing with.
That's what I mean.
So if you look at the number of registrations so far this year, you're about 6,000 ahead of where you were previously, but don't forget that all those July people canceled. 50% of them canceled or so. So it's probably around the same, and I would imagine even though the numbers are really, really early in the cycle, they're not too dissimilar at this point. And then the last thing is they published one of their blogs, my favorite law:fully blog that they put in here. And it's actually about their pre-law undergraduate scholars program, which is basically out there to foster diversity and to give opportunity to students who don't have a lot of advantages. And so they kind of go through there and they do some personal stories. If you get a chance, I think it's worthwhile to read.
Yeah, I applaud that program, honestly.
Yeah, they should be doing stuff like that. I think it's great. Mm-hmm. It doesn't tell us anything about the LSAT itself, though, as really none of these things did. They're more about the admission cycle. And so, as far as I'm concerned, that's that.
That's that. All right.
Of course, there was one other thing that happened in the LSAT world.
What was there?
During that 2-week period. And I know our plan was to actually talk about it immediately. But then I had no power. So I would have to call in on a phone. And that was the October 2019 LSAT was administered. And that's really the main discussion point here.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this.
Yeah, so let's first off, kind of talk a little bit about what would be the good news and the bad news from this administration. And then we'll go into the actual discussion of the test insofar as we can talk about it.
Like a test day recap before we get into the content. I like it.
Yeah.
Can I make a guess as to where you'd prefer to start, good or bad?
Bad.
Yeah. That was my guess.
Well, I always say this when people come to
Vegas.
Me. How people walk into your office and they'll be like, I've got good news and bad news. And some people are like, please tell me the good news first. They want to hear something good. I'm always like, no, I don't care about that. Tell me the bad news immediately.
Yeah.
What do we have to deal with? So we're starting with the bad news.
Yeah, I can give you some bad news. Guns N' Roses suck, man. They're so bad. Guns N' Roses.
Talking about Guns N' Roses again?
I can't get over it. I can't get over it.
I once saw Guns N' Roses and Metallica play a stadium show at the Rose Bowl. And I was a huge Guns fan at that point and not really a Metallica fan, but they were both very good. Full credit. Clearly, the Guns show that I saw at that point was way better than what you saw.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. So anyone who just went through the October LSAT know that things could have been worse.
You could have seen GNR afterwards.
Yeah, you could have paid $600 a ticket for Guns N' Roses to disappoint you.
It was a mistake right there, $600 a ticket.
I know. All right, let's talk about the test.
Yeah.
We've been through something of a rocky patch here in the three digital LSATs that they've administered. We knew July was going to be hit or miss. They knew July was going to be hit or miss. That's why they built in all the stipulations and stuff. September seemed to really clean up in a lot of ways. I thought September went pretty well, all things considered. Would you call this further progress or a regression?
Well, it's interesting, even before we get to October. In September, one source of problems was shipping. Mm-hmm. And I thought they did a really smart thing. They came out and they put up a blog thereafter that said, look, we had a shipping problem and we are now analyzing where the problem came from. We're going to eliminate it. And I thought that was a smart thing to do because historically they don't talk like that. No. They're not transparent at all. And I know they're trying to do a better job of being transparent. And it is something that I know both of us appreciate greatly because when you're just a black box, you leave yourself susceptible to just people guessing. And for them to say and take ownership of the fact, look, some tablets didn't show up at places like Berkeley and Shoreline, Washington, and the reason is we had an issue in our system, that's great. So I liked that. I also expected problems like that to continue to diminish. And I don't think that's what happened here. I feel like October was really, regrettably, on the whole, a step back in terms of overall performance and outcomes. Which we'll talk a little bit more about. I hate to agree with you on
that, but yeah, I mean, it's almost an inescapable truth that this felt really like a turn in the wrong direction.
Yeah. July I give a free pass to. It was the first time they set everybody up with the sweetest deal imaginable. Students who had problems in July, my response is, hey, that's what you were paying for. They gave you these great options. In September and October, it's harder to take. I really expected October to go better. And I'll kind of make a disclaimer up front. If you were in a test center where it went well, it goes great.
Yeah.
The tablets work fine. The way the supervisor can turn them on and off and pause and everything is fantastic. The check-in can be really quick. It can be seamless to put your answers down. All sorts of positive things happen. And so we're not talking about that. And, for sure that was over 90% of the testing population. So when you think about this as a test taker and you're like, all right, I'm going to go in and take the exam, the majority chance here is that things go really well.
Yeah.
The problem is that when it doesn't go well, one of two things happens. One of it is catastrophic, where you can't take the test and it either gets postponed or stopped in the middle. That did happen again. We're well aware of that, or you didn't even get to start the test. And then the other thing that happens that's problematic is there are delays or problems that elongate the testing day. For example, we know of test centers where people were in there like over 7 hours. Mm-hmm. And the problem isn't so much that 7 hours is a long time. It's that you're trying to maintain this really high degree of mental acuity and performance and focus, and you can't.
Yeah.
You just lose it. And so it becomes kind of like a really unfair situation. That we don't know the percentage of centers where this happened. We know that the absolute catastrophe of not being able to take the test is a very small number. Mm-hmm. We know that there were a lot of centers, though, that had the delay problems, check-in, pausing issues like that. So when you run down the issues that we've seen previously, they're still all there.
Yeah.
There were tablets that didn't arrive or were lost that caused canceled tests or rescheduling. There were long check-in times at various places. Sometimes the tablets wouldn't sync up.
Yeah.
I think it was Boston, one of the 3 rooms didn't sync up, and so that room had to go home. They had to be rescheduled. There were problems with breaks and pausing. I heard of people having breaks between section 3 and 4 that were an hour long. And
I heard about proctors,
that too. We know that one of the great updates that they made, and we'll talk about this.
Yeah.
At least one of them was that they had said you can now put your tablet at any angle. Well, there were a bunch of proctors who didn't get that memo. And so they actually argued with test takers who, of course, couldn't pull out their phones to say it's right here on the website because you can't have a phone there.
Yeah. Yeah, even when
So
you're right, you're wrong, which is unfortunately the case for a lot of people. I heard stories about proctors coming, like, literally walking through rooms and just pushing tablets back down to the table.
which
Like,
is just weird.
manhandling people's tablets midsection.
It's disrespectful.
I mean,
But when we go through that, again, this is a relatively small portion of the test centers, not anything close to a majority. The reason we talk about this is twofold. Number one is that if you are going in to take a future LSAT, at least be aware of the fact that sometimes these things happen and have a mental plan for how you would deal with it. And then, of course, the second thing is something that I've talked about previously. Man, sunlight's the best disinfectant. You want to get people to fix problems? Publicize it. Put a light on it and talk about it. And oddly enough, after the test, I ended up just getting message after message from people who were like, I'm in this location and things went to hell and this is what's happened. And so the list of locations that had problems to me is it's staggering because it's everywhere.
yeah.
It's not just like, okay, we had all these problems in New York City. Didn't matter what coast, didn't matter whether it's north or south or Canada, there were just problems everywhere.
Yeah, it wasn't isolated like we saw in September, where like the Northwest had some shipping issues or something.
Yep.
This was, I mean, global.
Yeah, and I don't even think I have the complete list, but should I read the list?
I'm certain we don't. Yeah, I can get comfortable for a minute and go nuts.
I'm not going to read it in a minute. I'm going to read it in like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
This is the list of places where there was a problem of any sort, whether it was a delayed check-in or a completely canceled test. Atlanta, Binghamton, New York, Boston at 2 different locations, or I think 2 different days. Chicago, then the Columbia trifecta, Columbia, Missouri, Columbia, South Carolina, and Columbus, Ohio. So bad day to
be in
be in a Columbia
right.
area. Dallas, Eastern Illinois University, Honolulu, Hawaii, the accommodated test at Houston, Liberty University in Virginia. LA had some serious problems. New York, Northern Virginia had problems. Philadelphia, Portland, San Francisco, my favorite, Saskatoon. I think that's your favorite too.
Easily my favorite.
Yeah, making sure the Canadians are included in the misery. Shoreline, Washington, again. This was the place that had a tablet problem last time. We had people who had been registered for that test and this one just get just screwed.
Screwed's a good word for it.
Walnut Creek, as differentiated from San Francisco because it was 2 different locations here. And then last but not least, Youngstown, Ohio, which was actually the very first place that I heard on the day that had a problem. Test takers arrived and in very short order got an email from LSAC saying there'd been an issue, and then also there was a note on the door.
Which is just almost insulting. You show up to your center and there's just a note scribbled on the door.
At least there is a note.
Yeah.
I get what's happening there because if you are on the ground as a proctor and you're like, we have an issue. Like, for example,
what do you do?
Last year in San Francisco, they canceled one of the test centers because of smoke issues downtown. What else are you going to do? You don't have access to the student names. So putting a note on the door is really the best thing you can do. That's a long list.
That's a lot, dude.
And again, not all of those were absolutely catastrophic. They were, in many cases, just delays. People were still able to successfully take the test. But you and I have talked about this before. It is not fair to test takers to go in and have these problems and then say afterwards, oh, that was successful administration. It wasn't. It wasn't the same as somebody who had no problem.
It's a really lousy metric.
Yeah.
You got through it eventually.
I think
that's not good enough, man.
The example you used was War One. We're not just talking about casualties. We're also talking about injuries.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
99% survived. Yeah, but none of them have legs. Like,
either way, just put yourself in the position of those test takers. If you were in there and it took this long, what would you do? How would you mentally prepare to deal with it? If you're not ready for it, it really can be off-putting.
Yeah, which I think, again, we need to probably underscore this point. We're not doing this to just drag LSAC. I think there's room for improvement. I fully suspect they will continue to improve.
They know there's room for improvement, and they're working on it.
This is for the user. If you're walking into a test day, know that things can go wrong in various ways, and do your best to insulate yourself against those potentialities. It's probably not going to happen. But have a snack. Use the bathroom before you check in, because once you are checked in, there is no restroom break. Not till section 3 or 4. So plan ahead for these things. Again, prepare yourself mentally for the fact that things might not go the way you hope.
Well, I think we can all agree that we want LSAC to get this right.
Yeah.
We want to see zero problems. And part of the process of talking about it is to let them know people are watching. I know they want to get it right. I know they're working on it. Do I ever think that it'll be right every single time? Actually, I don't. I think human error and some of the problems with this many locations make it virtually impossible. And that's why it's important to at least mentally walk through the steps beforehand as to what you would do.
Yeah, look, when you've got 30,000 people about to take a test in November, you're not going to bat 30,000 for 30,000. Right? Something's going to go wrong. And again, the reason we have these conversations, it's not to take cheap shots, at least in my opinion.
No. Well, I mean, 30,000 tablets is already like there's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, count on it.
Let's talk about the good news.
I hope it doesn't happen to you, but in case it does, just be aware.
Yeah, think about it beforehand. What would you do?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the good news. Okay. We kind of talked a little bit about it, is that in many centers, things went just fine. I had people send me messages like, oh, my center was great. I'm like, yes, you're one of the lucky ones. You know, that's what it should be. That should be the expected outcome. Things went really well, and in many cases, it did. By the way, when things don't go right, LSAC will contact you. Mm-hmm. They will help reschedule the test. Usually the rescheduling of the test is sometimes a week later. More often than not, it's 2 weeks later. But they're not going to leave you hanging. The problem is they may not, and in many cases, they do not contact you like instantly. They did actually in Youngstown, Ohio. It was very quick. But in a lot of locations, they're not able to because they have to talk to the center management. They have to figure out if they can reuse that location in a week or two. They have to go through all these processes where, you know, they know there's an issue, but they won't give you an immediate date. So if you're thinking it's been 24 hours or even 48 hours, you're like, I don't know when my test is. Kind of assume that it's going to be 2 weeks later.
Yeah, that's the
And then
time.
kind of like realize that this is just the way the process is.
So to put that into a degree of perspective, as of this recording, there are still people who haven't taken the October LSAT. It could be another week before some people are able to take their test.
Yeah, I don't know we'll have to see what the situation is. But yes, there are people who are still taking it this weekend and who have yet to take it.
Yeah, I think there were people taking it, might be sitting there taking it right now as we record this, frankly.
Yeah, and by the way, if you are taking one of these later tests, you'll still get your scores at the same time.
Yeah, which is obviously good news as well. And again, credit to LSAC.
Credit to them. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're not like, well, sorry, you took it 2 weeks later, so you get your score 2 weeks later.
Yeah, you have to wait an extra 2 weeks to apply. Now, you'll get your score on the release date. You may take a different test, but you'll get the score.
So did they do anything else right?
They did a couple of things, one of which you've already mentioned, which is that they have now allowed people the ability to manipulate the tablet position, the angle relative to the desk. It's...
When the proctors know about it.
When the proctors know. But it's not nothing. I mean, screen glare has been a huge issue since this started in July, and that was largely caused by overhead fluorescent lights at the flat tablet. The fact that you can prop it up now is a good thing. There was one other adjustment that they made to the conditions of taking the test, which was the scratch paper. The two biggest complaints I heard about scratch paper were that it was really crappy quality. It was like the Guns N' Roses of scratch paper. And secondly, it had this giant watermark right through the middle of it that obscured. It was like pencil colored too, which is just dumb. But it obscured a lot of people's free handwriting. They have increased the quality of the paper, which is good. And the watermark or whatever, the LSAC branding has been moved down to the very bottom of the page.
It's only about an inch high, so it's not really in the way anymore.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. You respond to the complaints, and you take notice, and you fix it.
It's encouraging, frankly, that they're listening. Like, people were like, this is a real problem. They fixed it. It's awesome.
They did, and I'm a big thumbs up on that because, I mean, scratch paper should be the least of your problems during the test, and it wasn't in the first two administrations, and I didn't think they'd change it for a year. So, color me
it was
surprised.
Quick too. I mean, they turned it around in 2 administrations. That's pretty good.
Good for them.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give credit where credit is due, and it is definitely due here. So
now, as we talk about good news, you got anything else?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
Again,
That was
most
brief.
of it is good news for the people who didn't have problems. It's
Yeah,
just
when you say
terrible
you're
news
one
for
of the
people who
lucky
didn't.
ones, you're one of the vast, vast majority. But the fact that there was a sizable minority is still something that I hope they're working hard to remedy.
Yeah, and maybe at some point they'll start tracking, or perhaps releasing would be the better word, the number of people who had non-standard experiences, which would include delays, pauses, and other things. I would love to see those numbers. I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, don't hold your breath, buddy.
It's never coming.
Don't hold your breath. I'll miss you.
All right, let's go on and talk about the test itself.
Yeah, let's do it. Oh, God, where to begin? I suppose with a disclaimer, where we always begin these conversations, which is, listen, we're talking about things that are fully public, well distributed, and allowed, per my understanding at least. We are not going to talk strategies. We're not going to talk answer choices. We're not going to give anyone who still hasn't somehow taken this test any kind of advantage or insight that they could use to benefit themselves. In fact, I would be, in a lot of ways, I think, demoralized by even the prospect of doing that.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about game types. We're not
Right.
going to talk about the best way to solve a particular game that's out there. But we're just going to talk about general impressions. And the reason that we do that is it's a comfort thing. It allows someone who took the test to say, well, was my perception of it reasonably accurate when you look at everyone else's view of it, or was I way off? Mm-hmm. We saw this in September where the game section was universally considered really hard, and it was very reassuring for other students to come out and be like, that game section seemed difficult. Oh boy, everyone else thought that too.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel better.
Did I get uniquely crushed, or was everyone suffering?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you can see people kind of like self-assessing when they're like, wait, my view was very different. Mm-hmm. So out of respect for their copyrights, we won't talk about specifics, but they have allowed the discussion of exams in general afterwards for years and years, and have made statements to that effect to us about what they consider acceptable and unacceptable, and we're not going to cross those lines. So it's all public information, but we've kind of collated it here, but it's going to be general.
Yeah. Let's talk about the test then. I'm excited to get into this.
So what was unique about the number of questions?
Well, that to me is the first standout feature, right? Another 102 question LSAT, 2 of the last 3, June and now this one, which is, again, pretty unique. I don't know that this is going to become the new normal for anyone out there wondering, but 2 out of the last 3 have had 102 questions.
Yeah, this is like, what, the 5th one with 102 questions?
Something like that, yeah.
In the entire history of released tests. There have been some other ones that we're aware of, but they were unreleased. They did another interesting thing, too, which I think we can debate what the cause is of it. In July, we saw that all the experimentals were LR, which was extremely unique and confusing for students trying to figure out what their experimental section was.
And then, you know what? Admittedly, confusing for us.
Oh, yeah. There was wild debate afterwards. Ridiculous theories were being floated.
I know you're still proud of yourself for landing on the right side of all that.
For ignoring the hype and being like, I don't think it's real, and then being right about it. Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to take
You should.
I'll step up on the podium for that.
Back pats to you. But in this case, what was weird about the experimental, at least I never saw any logic games.
There weren't.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Towards the end of the day, I think I put it on Twitter. I was like, I've been looking, and all the comments are about LR and RC. I don't see any logic games experimentals out there. And someone was asking me about why that might be the case.
That's a good question.
Yeah, at least one theory is, well, maybe they have enough. Maybe right now they have a deficiency of LR and RC, so they wanted to test as many of those as possible, but they're generally okay in logic games, which would make some sense because obviously they're easier to make, and they're a little bit easier to make airtight from a logical standpoint. So when they have the kind of test development horizon that they do, and they're having to force through all these new exams and everything, they may have just fallen behind in LR and RC, and they're making that up right now by testing a whole bunch of different sections and not having to worry about games so much.
That's the best explanation I've got for it.
It's probably the most reasonable explanation.
It seems like it.
I'll take credit for it.
By all means. I'll give it to you.
So how was the test itself? How was the test itself on the whole? We know September was like the games were terrible and people were really upset after that exam.
You and I did a crystal ball a little while back where we predicted really the final 3 LSATs of the year. November coming up is the third of the 3. And what we essentially described was more or less what happened, in my opinion, again, which is, look, they're a little slippery with logical reasoning, but they're testing the same ideas. The logic games are basically going to come down to the same standout types, linearity and grouping. And again, I'm not going to talk about specific games here, but reading comp has become more and more challenging, I think. We've seen this like escalating trend of reading comp difficulty over the last couple of years. You may disagree with that a little bit. But yeah, there was nothing about this test that caught my eye to make me think like, oh wow, well, there's a surprise. There's a novelty.
Well, I think what's notable about the way this worked out was that unlike September, where Logic Games was the hardest section, they switched it over to RC.
Yeah.
Now, if you're out there and you're taking a November test or a January test, this doesn't mean that there's some new trend where all the RCs are going to be really hard. This is what they do. This is the way you make tests. Sometimes it's going to be games that's hardest. Sometimes it's reading comp. Sometimes it's logical reasoning.
Yeah.
The rotation keeps people off balance. And so it's no surprise. Someone asked me before the exam, they're like, well, with games, you think it'll be hard games again? I was like, no, if anything, it might be RC.
Yeah.
But that's more just kind of like a logical deduction. There's no like predictive power in that, because if it had been LR, my response would have been equally like, oh yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
And if it had been another hard game section, I would have been like, that happens too.
Sure.
The fact that we don't know is part of their job. So
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, if I could tell you that the November test was going to have like game number 3 is going to really be rough. If I could say that, the LSAC is failing, frankly.
Totally.
I would love to be able to do that, but no,
we did it a little bit last year in July, but that was
pretty good at what they do.
Unique.
Yeah, that's fair. We did call that one. It's also, I think, speaks to the value of looking at this test as a collective experience. So when people are like, what should I study for the next exam? I'm never like, June 2019, that's your test. I'm always like, look, you've really got to interpret the last couple of years worth. September and November of last year, for instance, the LR on those tests, to me, is remarkably revealing. If you can do those LR sections well, you're good. If you can do this September's games, you're good. If you could do, we won't have a copy of it, unfortunately, but if you could do this October's reading comp, that's kind of the ceiling. You're good. But that's why I think you have to take a broader timeline or broader view on this.
You do, because LSATs are collective. Mm-hmm. And when you get something like a harder reading comp section like you see here in October, well, guess what? A lot of people came out and said games were pretty normal. I felt decent about those. And again, we'll talk about it briefly in just a few minutes, but that collective aspect is what makes the test kind of difficult to prepare for. If you always knew that games was going to be the hardest section, that would change how you approach the test strategically, especially during your preparation phase. But it moves around. So whenever you look at LSATs, you never really want to say, this is the LSAT that I must study. It's always, this is a group of tests that would be useful to study.
Yeah, I get that question a lot about like, which test should I take? And I'm like, you can't, it's not singular. It's plural. Like, take everything from 2016 through the present, basically, is how I feel about it.
Yeah, the other thing that I would probably say is that when you look at an LSAT and you look at the 4 sections, let's imagine there's a scale of difficulty from 1 to 5 for every LSAT.
I know where you're going with this. I like it already.
And their goal is for every test to be 3. They want it exactly in the middle. Does that mean that each of the 4 sections has to be a 3-level difficulty?
Of course not. No.
So what happens is, let's say you have reading comp and it's a 4-level difficulty. Well, what are they going to do? Well, now the average is above 3 if they keep everything else at 3, so they're going to find something else, maybe a logical reasoning section, and make it a 2 difficulty. This is how they offset difficulty. We see this in logical reasoning sections.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if you get a really hard LR section, the other section is correspondingly easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I've explained this to people, like there's a finite amount of challenge that they have. Like this, it's pretty well established ahead of time how much difficulty they can impose. It's just really a question of where they're going to emphasize it. How they're going to stack the cards.
Yeah, and so it moves around. Got a tough LG section. All right, we're going to make something else easier. So same thing has happened here. This time it happened to be reading comprehension. It doesn't mean anything for November. It could be any one of the 3 section types that shows up as being hard. It could be games. It wouldn't surprise me. So if it was LR, I'd be like, okay,
Yeah.
Just taking their turn at the plate, just like every other section does.
That's a good way to put it. I'm envisioning like a pitcher with a catcher giving signals, and that's basically what it is. You're gonna throw a fastball. You're gonna throw a slider. How about that hanging curve? That's what this is. You never quite know what the next pitch is, but there's only so much they can do.
Yeah, and it's tough to tip the signs off and
we could
read them.
We could really go deep into this. I'm not even a baseball fan, and we could go deep into this.
That's actually been a big issue in Major League Baseball in the last couple of years.
I've heard that they're going to go to digital umpiring.
Well, after some of the stuff recently, you could see why they might want to.
I mean, they've done it in soccer. They've done it in tennis. Why not?
Let's not talk about soccer. The use of VAR in world soccer has just been an abomination so far. Well, because they don't follow the rules, by the way. The rules are if it's a clear and obvious error to fix it, and instead they're like, well, it looks like he might have put his pinky on his knee, and that's why he fell. Okay, it's a penalty. It's like ridiculous.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yes, I just did. Obviously, I know a little bit about soccer or football.
You actually know quite a bit. I'm not going to get in that ring with you because I'll lose.
Yeah.
But I think this was, on the whole, a pretty reasonable test. Pretty predictable based off of what we generally saw coming. No one that I've spoken to walked out of this test feeling like they had been, mistreated by it. 102 questions is rough, but other than that.
That's exactly right. I think there's the extra questions. Everybody knew that reading comp was a little bit harder, and they felt that. But I didn't get anyone coming out like I did from September saying this is the hardest LSAT of all time.
Yeah.
Also because reading comp doesn't tend to strike terror in the hearts of test takers the way games does.
That's a fair point. It's a little less polarizing in the sense. You and I have talked before about like our own very unique or individualized ideal tests. This would have been a bad test for me, I think. In the grand scheme of like what I would have hoped for. I want hard games. I want accessible reading comp. I want 100 questions. Give me 99 questions. Get me out of there.
You're lazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, a lot of things would have stacked up kind of unfavorably for me here.
Well, the thing I think for the average test taker is games is a bellwether.
Yeah.
If it goes well, you feel good. It's like the rising tide lifts all boats. If it goes poorly, you feel just demoralized and it affects the rest of the test. Reading comp doesn't have that same widespread consequence to it. You feel like, well, I could still read. I still understood a lot of what I was getting at. Yeah, it was hard, but I didn't feel completely overmatched. Whereas in September, some people did the game section. They're like, I'm lost.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to do. I don't know where to start here.
And I know a lot of people listening to us talk about those games were furious.
Well, because of the way you dismissed them as easy.
I didn't call them easy. I called them doable.
You called them doable, and I said quite rightly that they were definitely hard.
I didn't say they weren't. I just said they didn't present the same like impossibility that people were responding to. Don't drag me back into this. That was controversial once.
Of course I'm going to drag you back into it. I think what you were complaining about was that their reputation was impossible.
I thought it was undeserved.
And the reality for you was you could still do them and you felt decent about it.
But it wasn't just for me. I could see how a student who was well prepared and knew what to look for could also have succeeded. For me to look at games and be like, hey, I can do these. Why? That's useless.
I thought the reputation was overblown, but
there you go.
That aside, in actual fact, is that a difficult game section? Yes.
Yeah. You sound like a Guns N' Roses apologist. That's what you sound like.
Not me,
man.
I'm
not going to let this go.
you clearly are not going to let that go.
I'm very bitter.
I just think it's funny that you paid that much to see them because I did not when I saw them in San Francisco a couple years ago.
I know.
And they were better. Slash was really good on guitar. So
yeah. Hey, that knife you're twisting.
Sorry, buddy.
Ease up.
And the Struts were the opener. So
I know.
I got more out of it than I could have ever imagined. Anyway.
Oh, well.
So at least as far as the test sections, we'll go through them in just a minute, but the test was reasonable. RC was the hardest, but games and reasoning fairly normal. November's coming up. Everything's already locked in as far as registration. If you are thinking to yourself, I think I'm going to take the LSAT again, your only choice right now is January.
Yeah.
You have until December 3rd, I think is the date. So you have about a month to make the decision on January.
And I should say nothing wrong with January, by the way. It's a little bit pushed back, but just about every school out there, in fact, I think all but maybe Stanford, will take the January results. So you're in fine shape.
And Stanford's actually said, well, if you do send it in,
they put some
they'll
caveat
still look at it.
Right.
You know, we can't say that officially. I'm like, jeez, stop playing games. You know, I get it. You're Stanford. You can do whatever you want. But why don't you act like a good citizen of the legal world?
Yeah. Anyway, if you're looking at the January test and you're hearing us talk about this, there's no pejorative to it. I think January is an actual reasonable date. The only downside to January is I see it's a lot like October. You don't get a copy. That's always a bummer.
You don't get a copy, and I'll make this additional point from an admissions standpoint. Because when people are like, is January too late? They are talking about the rolling admissions process and whether or not there will be money or admission spaces. And I've said this before. I've talked to many friends in this field who agree with this and have said the same type of thing. 95% of the time, if not more, it is better to apply later with a higher LSAT score. Why? Because the LSAT score is what gets reported to the ABA and eventually used by U.S. News. If you apply earlier with a lower score, your application date is not tracked by any reportable agency like the ABA. Nobody gives them any credit. So if they're looking at two applicants, one who applied in October and one who applied in January, and they're identical and the January person has a higher LSAT score, they're going to get the nod if there's only one space remaining.
Yeah.
So maximize the black and white number that is the LSAT. That's the one thing that you can really affect. You can affect your GPA, but for many people, it's already locked or mostly locked.
Yeah. I'm going to emphasize a word you just said, which is the word higher. He didn't quantify it. He didn't say 4 points higher, 6 points higher. Higher. If you can score 1 or 2 points higher in January than you could in November, take the later test.
I once heard, I think it was the Dean of Admissions from Penn. I might be wrong about which school it was. Former Dean of Admissions from Penn was being asked about the December versus the February LSAT and whether or not scoring 1 point higher was worth it from February. And his response was, look, in general, the answer is yes. And if you're below our medians, the answer is definitely yes. So that was, a little bit further back when there were fewer LSATs. And, so it's a little bit different. But think about that comment. 1 point to him. Classic T14 school, that yes, indeed, it was worth it in their eyes. And depending on where that point was, it could be, decisive.
Yeah, 1 point beats 2 months at that point. That's, Anyway, I think we've made our case.
Yes, but we'll have to make it many, 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 many more times in the coming years.
I know we will.
Because it's one of the most common questions I get asked.
Oh, constantly. All right, let's talk about the actual content on this thing and go enjoy our Sundays.
All right, let's start off with logic games.
Agreed. 23 questions, pretty standard. Really pretty standard throughout, as I would describe it. And again, I know we can't talk too much about game type, but...
So you had attorneys and cases.
Mm-hmm.
You had presentations being made at a book club, which you can kind of figure out what that might be like. You had the third game, I think, was the one that everybody felt was the hardest.
I think so, too.
And that was about bookstore employees who were stocking shelving, or they were shelving.
It was like shifts of employees or something, stocking shelves.
Yeah. And then last but not least, there were travel guides who were giving tours in South America, a couple countries down there.
Yeah.
So that scenario where the hardest game appears to have been third or fourth, that's really kind of a friendly outcome. That's how people felt about September. The Flowers game everybody complained about was the third game.
Game 3, yeah.
And the difference there was that the first two games of September, people didn't feel like it was easy. And they wanted to have it feel easy before they got to the hard stuff. Here, I didn't hear nearly as many complaints about the games around that shelving game. So it went back a little bit more to form where it's like, all right, there's some stuff here where I can knock out some questions, feel good about it. Then I'll have a little bit more time, hopefully, on a game that I find hard. And then it closes down with a game that's not easy, but is also not as difficult as the prior game. That's kind of really the best way you can ask for it.
Yeah.
And if you get into that third game and you're thinking, oh, this is really tough, go to the fourth game.
Jump. Yeah,
We've talked about this 100 times. You do not have to do the games or the passages or anything in the order they give it to you. They're not your friends from a test-taking standpoint. They want to see how you respond to adversity.
In what world would you expect charity from LSAC? What are you doing? Expect them to try to confound you. You have to be agile, gymnastic. You got to move. Make the test your own.
Let me just clarify, though. Charity in a test-making and taking sense.
That's what I mean. Are they going to put the games in the best possible order for you? Maybe not. Are they going to put the questions in the best possible order? Again, maybe not. So
they do a lot of charitable and outreach stuff outside of the LSAT.
That's, of course, not what I meant. No, I mean within the 102 questions. What are you going to get?
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm not talking about their behavior on a grander scale. The big complaint from September that I didn't hear here was that everybody complained in September that none of the games was... Well, the word I kept hearing was like a gimme. None of the games was super straightforward as like a gift. Game 1, all right, well, at least there's this. At least there's these free 6 points. That in September, I think, was a pretty fair assessment. Here, I didn't hear that same degree of like inaccessibility.
Well, I'd have to agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Everything seemed... everybody felt pretty good about this overall. I had some students who were actually angry because they're like, this was so easy. I should not have screwed this up. I mean, it didn't happen often, but it was that kind of thing where like I blew an opportunity to really dominate this.
I heard that too. And to me, this was something of an alley-oop, as it were. You didn't have that like misdirection of a circular game in game 2 like you did in September. I say misdirection because it wasn't circular. It was really just linear. And I'm sure people are tired of hearing me talk about September games as though they're easier than was thought to be. These games, though, I do think it's pretty fair to say weren't that bad.
So let's go to the tough section on this test, which was reading comprehension. And we know that they used this section as an experimental in 2018, on the June 2018 LSAT.
That's a pretty quick turnaround.
But a year and a half seems to be very normal right now.
Yeah.
For them. That wasn't, to my recollection, the way it used to be in years past, but it is now. And there was no doubt this was the section I heard everybody complaining about afterwards. And interestingly enough, from a topical standpoint, it's not all that unusual. But it never is in reading comprehension. It's not so much about the topics, it's about the way they actually execute the passage, how dense the text is, how well you get an understanding, and then how tricky the questions are.
Yeah, to call something science or humanities is really useless in a way, because that doesn't tell you anything about the over difficulty or, the construction itself.
So the 4 passages, you had one that was about jazz and Latin jazz, which I think was reasonable. There was another one it was kind of hard to figure out, but it had a lot to do with like glaciers and ice volcanoes and drilling for ice cores.
Yeah.
Obviously in a science vein there. I don't think we're giving out anything that's problematic.
No, if anyone just cracked it because you said that, more power to you.
Yeah. Then there was another passage about cyclists and camping and park managers up in Canada, which actually sounds like a really interesting passage. I'd like to read it.
I would too. So I was thinking that about the Indonesian ice volcanoes. I was thinking, I'd like to read that.
I think ice cores are really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't mind seeing that one either. And then there was a comparative passage on intellectual property and ownership that was apparently very challenging.
That was the comparative passage, I believe, yeah.
Yeah. And this is an interesting one because this is a topic that I know a sizable amount about. So I would love to read it from the perspective of somebody who's dealt with a lot of intellectual property issues previously. Being able to say, did that help me? Did I have any extra insight? Did I think it was hard?
That's how I felt about ice cores.
There you go.
Yeah.
You know a lot about ice cores?
I could do an entire podcast on Thomas Misley Jr.'s effect and how we can actually measure, global ozone layers through ice core drilling. Yeah. If you don't know who Thomas Misley Jr. is, look him up. He's a fascinating character, and he probably did more to damage the environment than anyone in history.
Well, you do that podcast. I'm going to skip it if you don't mind.
No, I figured you'd probably tune out.
I already have.
All right.
But this was a tough section. There's no question about it. Everybody complained about it. I didn't hear anyone say that was easy. But if your game section isn't that tough, is it the worst thing to have a tough RC section? I don't know. I mean, it's a fair trade, obviously, and that's what you have to expect they're going to do. So I accept it. 27 questions in this section and hard.
Yeah. This was rough. Look, no getting around it.
Yeah, and that led us to the 2 LR sections, which is where we knew that we were looking at 102 questions on this test because each one of those was 26 questions.
Yeah, just like June.
Yeah, I don't love that personally because that makes for a long section. That extra question really squeezes out the time. I'd rather have those extra seconds to distribute among all the other questions.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, give me 99. That's my ticket.
Yeah, and I heard about tough questions and notable questions that were out there. For example, there was a question about fish that had like upward-facing eyes, both on the same side of their head.
She might be listening to this at some point. In case she is, one of my tutoring students, that was the question. She 2 days it took her to get over that question.
They lay on the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, if you're listening, you know who you are. Let it go.
I have a feeling I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, you do.
But there's questions out there about will-o-wisps and ghosts. Mm-hmm. That sounds fun to me. I want to do that question. Like, I don't know any of the details of it, and so I can't, speak to that. But it sounds like a question that I would enjoy reading and seeing what they're up to. There's like these Jupiter-sized moons. There was like nuts and weight loss. There were like cigarette taxing policies.
Yeah, some questions I don't want to read, like encouraging vegetarianism.
Yeah, 100% about steak here. There were like seals understanding killer whale dialects. There was like American Sign Language, the ASL, and pantomiming.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, the classic range of topics that I'd be interested in reading typically, not so much the vegetarianism.
Right.
But I'm more joking there. But you can't tell anything about difficulty. What I didn't hear, though, was this felt really tough and slippery and sketchy as the LR. Yeah, there's a couple questions. But, dude, there's always a couple of questions that are tough in LR. This is just standard. Someone's saying, man, there were 3 questions in each section that I really had a tough time with. My response is, only 3? You got lucky.
I will say some of the toughest LR is tough because it's so elusive. In other words, I always take it with a grain of salt when people come back and like, LR seemed fine. To me, that's going to go one way or the other. Like, could be that it was fine or like, uh-oh. I heard people say that last November. I heard people say that last September. And you and I both know in looking at those tests, those were really tough LR tests.
They were. And when LR is made at the highest level of difficulty, you miss the question without even knowing it was hard.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and that we saw a bunch of questions where I remember reading it and I was like, ooh, that answer's going to just go down like Coca-Cola and people are going to select it left and right and it's going to be wrong.
Yeah, it's Pepsi. You and I were actually, I remember us making those noises at each other as we went through the LR over the phone together for parts of it. Us both being like, ooh, there was just a lot of the, body shot. You could feel it. You can tell like, oh man, I know people picked this.
Yeah, and that's, you see that in every section. The question is, how much will you see it?
Yeah.
Will you see it a lot or just a little bit? And so, at least as far as that goes, I didn't feel like students came back and were really uncertain about a whole lot. They're like, no, I felt okay. And usually, when you have a large group of people who are making comments to that effect, it ends up being relatively accurate. A lot of the high scores that at least we know or that, we're familiar with online, I didn't see them making comments to the effect of like, oh, LR killed me. It would be like, this one question was tough.
Yeah, that's stupid fish. But for the most part, I didn't hear anybody broadly complaining, which is good.
Yeah, and that actually ended up that entire picture where the test itself from an LR and LG standpoint seems reasonable and RC seems hard. This informed the scale. Because very early on I said to you, this feels like a -10 scale to me.
Yeah.
And then we were like, wait a second, it's 102 questions.
Yeah, I talked you off of it, but...
No, you didn't talk me off of it. I think I wasn't even...
Okay.
If this had been 101 questions, I would have said this was a -10 scale. But because it was 102, I was like, it's got to be adjusted back to -11.
Interestingly enough, that puts you at the same amount right, which is 91.
Yeah.
So, yeah, your instincts weren't wrong.
No, they weren't.
Your math
Thank
was
you.
bad, but your instincts were good.
My math wasn't bad. I wasn't thinking about 102 questions, man.
All right.
At that point, it hadn't even been confirmed, so I was just kind of like,
That
this
is
is what
true.
this
Yeah, we had that
feels like.
conversation early in the day. But minus 11, I like it. I hope we're wrong, as always.
Yeah, I hope it's minus 15. But the truth is, this didn't feel like anything nearly as tough as September, which was minus 13.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable with where we're at with minus 11 based on the 102. I think that's it's probably right on or at most off by 1. And we're not going to know anytime soon, so that's the best we can do at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting how where the difficulty gets assigned or impacted or whatever affects this. Hard games are going to make the scale softer more than a hard reading comp is going to.
Yeah.
This was a hard reading comp. The scale's not going to be quite as reflective.
And we talked about that, the bellwether effect, the pervasive effects of it.
That's right.
So minus 11 it is. We didn't even waver on it. It was like, this is the prediction. I didn't even do a preliminary on it. I was like, I feel very strongly about how this is coming out and what I'm seeing about this exam.
As much as you and I like to argue, this was one we couldn't. So
no, I think we're both on the same page.
Yeah, for sure.
So
when will people know, not the scale, because never, when will people know the results?
Well, it's coming up on us, but we still got a long wait ahead. It is Monday, November 20th. And if they hold to their prior protocols, that will be around 9 a.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, and I have no reason to think they won't, so.
Me neither. Do you think they'll release it early?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Totally.
I know you're joking.
I am joking.
You shouldn't even joke about that. You realize that could cause a panic.
I know. Yeah, I hope no one tuned in for just that part.
John said it's coming early. No, John did not say that. That was sarcasm.
I most certainly did not. No, it's coming Monday morning.
Yeah, it would be
the
like
20th, Monday.
The 20th.
Yeah.
Be like him saying he loved that GNR show. Sarcasm.
That's just a bold-faced lie is what that would be. That's nothing sarcastic.
Sarcasm by me, though.
Ugh.
No, Monday, November 20th, they've been holding to the rules recently. The only thing that would ever cause them not to or to release it early is if there was some kind of huge weather event that was about to affect them, which seems rather unlikely in that point in November.
Probably.
So I would say November 20th is actually going to be the time and date.
Yeah, the reference you're making, I think, is an old February test where they said it was coming that morning and they released it the night before. Am I remembering this right?
Yes, because of the weather aspect.
A storm coming through Newtown.
And then also the July test of this year where they're like, we're going to release it a week early. But that was a special case. So both of these are very special cases. However, what it has done is make me no longer say something I used to say, which is 100% they'll release it on the date and time they say. Now I'm like, most likely. But 2 times they've done it where they've changed it. And so I've lost.
Yeah, fool me
I've
once.
lost faith.
Fool me once.
That's right. Fool me twice.
You're saying you don't trust them.
A little bit.
So jaded.
One thing I will say is, especially if this was your first time taking the test, you do need to take that LSAT writing at some point, which is done separately online. They'll give you your score without having an LSAT writing, but they won't release it to law schools unless you have at least one LSAT writing on the record. And based upon what we've been hearing about people's experiences with the LSAT writing,
I was hoping you'd say this.
Do it soon, because there have been widespread issues with scores not recording, problems with the system, somebody getting a message afterwards that says, oh, wait a second, there was a problem with your scratch paper, or another program was running on your computer. Don't keep it to the last minute.
Get it done
earlier.
And really follow the instructions to the letter. They are apparently being much stricter on this stuff. Like, oh, my ID was a little blurry when I held it up to the webcam. I didn't show both sides of my scratch paper. And they'll cancel your whole thing and make you redo it.
It's ridiculous, man. Nobody's cheating on the writing sample. Okay? It's just not. If they're cheating on the writing sample, their LSAT scores are going to show that anyway.
Yeah, you would think. That's the kind of lawyer I want.
You just don't. I mean, the only way I could see this happening is
I mean, why? It's not
very rare.
Yeah, why? No, it's just something to get done, basically. But follow the rules because they are being very, very tight about what they're allowing, basically. So
yeah, and I don't actually mind them
word to the wise.
strict or tight with the rules as long as they're consistent and it works.
Yeah, consistent. I think that's the big thing.
Yeah, there's just been so many problems. It's been a worry. But make sure you do that at some point, and the earlier the better, so that if you're waiting for your scores to come out and your applications are dependent upon those, you don't then have to wait to get that sample or the LSAT writing processed.
Yeah, I should mention, too, you and I did an entire podcast on the writing sample. So for anyone out there looking to do their very best, go pull that episode up. I don't know what episode.
Go crush it. I'll link it in our program notes on our website.
There you go.
For the podcast. All right. So aside from you really being a new convert to GNR, and lining up to go on their next tour with them, what else did we learn from this?
Oh, God, no. I want to jump under their tour bus. What have I learned from this? That once again, we were right.
Just sounds so arrogant.
How's that? I know. That is not me at my most immodest.
No,
but the truth of the matter is, what we said for these last two tests has been more or less on the money. What we've said about November, I anticipate going 3 for 3.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm doing that a little tongue in cheek, of course, but
sure. But I mean, September's games were going to be really specifically hard.
We've never gone so far as to say, we've never been like, that's going to be the RC test. That's going to be the games. We wouldn't do that anyway.
No one can do that,
right? But if you're curious about what this means for November, my expectations haven't changed.
No, and I agree with you on that. I do hope that even though there's a relatively short period of time for them to fix these problems, that they get, further work done on that. I would like to see a really minimal test issue, tablet issue, all those kind of delays that we talked about going forward.
The best I can say is I can't imagine it gets worse. In that regard. Is that too much? Is that too extreme? This was just, it felt like such a step backwards, man. Like,
it felt like a step backwards. Could it be worse? Of course it could be worse.
I mean, the tablets could explode.
Let's don't even talk about stuff like that. Good God, man.
Good God, man. They're not Samsung. You'll be fine. But I'm with you. I think you and I are both confident in what we'll see in November in terms of content, optimistic in terms of November and what we'll see in execution. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I'd like to see the execution get up. And again, I'll say the same thing I've said repeatedly. If the communication can keep improving in the speed of response, even just to say, Lou, we know there is a problem, we're working on it, we'll update you.
Yeah.
Boy, that goes a long way towards establishing goodwill and mitigating anger.
Yeah. And in the meantime, we're here.
We are.
We'll keep you posted.
We'll keep talking about this stuff to make sure that it doesn't just go away and get forgotten. All right, on that note, let's call it a day. I got friends coming over relatively soon, so it's time to keep drinking.
Yeah, I've got to go burn some albums.
Use your illusion, Jon.
Yeah. Oh, I've lost illusion.
Don't burn Welcome to the Jungle, man. That album's still great.
God. All right.
It's one of the greatest albums of all time. No matter what happened in Las Vegas.
Until you see them attempt it.
No. I will not think about it that way. I will just think about Slash just shredding on the guitar.
Slash was great. It was just
this great interplay and everything.
Bloated disappointment with a microphone.
Well, that was your fault for going to see them years and years later.
Yeah, I guess so. Oh, well.
I invited you to go to Paris. I said, hey, let's go see the Struts. I'm going to be there. You guys can all show up. And you talked about it, but instead, you made your choice. Now you live with it.
I know. I'm going to have to. All right. On that sad note, I am going to go make a Tom Collins.
Woohoo.
Let me out of here.
All right. If you get a chance, subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube, or anywhere else you may find it, including a Guns N' Roses show. Give us a rating and send us any questions that you have to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com or lsat@powerscore.com. On behalf of Jon and myself, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.